Hi everyone, my name is Jen and this is Bee's House of Plants, where we talk about all things house plant and home design. Welcome back. Happy New Year's everyone. Happy 2021. New Year's is my favorite holiday and I am particularly excited about it this year for obvious reasons. So my next video will be an update video of where I've been, but today I wanted to start off the year strong with a highly requested video. So this video is going to be an updated moss pole tutorial. I made one last year and since then I've definitely changed the way I make them. Not only do they look better now, they function better, and they are also suitable for LECA and semi-hydroponics, which obviously is important because I have started to transition a lot of my collection into LECA. Right off the bat, I did not come up with the way I'm about to show you on how to make moss poles. I basically follow exactly how Craig Milren does his moss poles. I'll make sure to link his Instagram in the description box for you. If you don't follow him, you should. His plants are freaking amazing. And he has a highlight bubble on his Instagram showing how he makes his moss poles, and I basically do just exactly that. I'm also going to put timestamps in the description if you want to skip around the video, if you want to skip straight to the part where I'm making the moss poles. But before we get to that point, I want to talk a little bit about why moss poles, like the pros and cons of having a moss pole. So the reason why a lot of people use moss poles for their plants is that if the plant is able to climb, and plants that are able to climb are often like monsteras, a lot of different types of philodendrons, your pothos, things like that. They are all climbers. When they're given something to climb, they produce better and bigger leaves. That's because in nature, a lot of times these plants are climbing up trees, and how they climb is that they produce aerial roots that then grab onto whatever, the tree, the moss pole, etc. The reason why a lot of people use moss poles particularly is because moss is able to hold a lot of water, and therefore it keeps it more consistently moist throughout the week than if you were just to use like a stick or something like that. So kind of like the cons of moss poles. So I actually don't really love the way moss poles look, because obviously you want, to give your plants something to climb on. Your moss pole is often, quite a bit bigger than where the leaves are. And so I just don't really love the look of like a bare moss pole, but I like the function of it so much that I just kind of deal with it. When my plants are in soil, I will most likely just give them like either a bamboo pole, like a bamboo stick, or a regular stick or something like that. But that doesn't really work with LECA or semi-hydro because there's a reservoir of water, and when you leave bamboo or wood or anything in water consistently, it tends to mold and rot. There are different kinds of like sealants and varnishes that you can apply to like the lower portion of your bamboo, etc., for it to not rot. But I find that moss poles actually do work better in LECA, and that's because sphagnum moss also is able to self-wick, which is like kind of what LECA does, and therefore the pole actually does stay moist longer than if you had a sphagnum moss pole in soil. So yeah, the other con of moss poles is that although it does function better in LECA, it still dries out pretty quickly, but that's really something I just kind of like live with. I don't mist my moss poles. I bring it into the shower and I spray it down once a week, but other than that, like throughout the week, if it dries, I just let it dry. I think it's fine. Okay, so materials that you need to make a moss pole. So first, the biggest difference in how I make my moss poles now is that I use galvanized mesh wiring. I think it's like the stuff that I think you're supposed to use it to make like chicken coops or like fences or something. That's the aisle where I found it at Lowe's. I'll make sure to link either the exact product or something very, very similar in the description box for you. And then you'll need wire cutters to cut the galvanized mesh. And you'll probably need gloves. I don't really wear gloves, but when you do cut the wiring, it does get a little bit sharp. So if you have gloves, you should definitely use them. And then you're obviously going to need sphagnum moss to fill the moss poles with. The brand I typically use is the Best Grown New Zealand sphagnum moss. I get it off of Amazon. It is the best sphagnum moss I have found and have used. However, honestly, the moss within a sphagnum moss pole isn't as important as like the moss you use in your medium, I don't think. So if you want to opt for maybe like a more affordable option or something that you can locally source versus purchasing through Amazon, I think that is totally fine as well. But if you haven't used the Best Grown moss for propagations, I would recommend you try it because it is really like the best moss I've used. And I think the last thing you're gonna need is the garden twist ties. I use the garden twist ties to both finish, you know, like holding together the moss pole itself, but also to attach the plant to the moss poles. All right, so I think that's everything you need. I'm gonna switch over now to my bathroom because that's where I'm going to make the moss poles. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so the very first thing you're gonna do is you are going to want to rehydrate your sphagnum moss. So sphagnum moss comes in like a pretty compact block, and then it expands once you add water. So I just have my trusty pink bucket here. Gonna crack open this bag, and then I'm just gonna estimate how much I need. Okay, I'm gonna start with this much, and then, you know, if I need more, I can always just rehydrate more. And then I'm also gonna use this old moss. It's the same brand of moss. This was just for a propagation that I ended up planting up. I don't like to throw away my moss because it is a limited resource, so I try to reuse it. Okay, now the trick is to try to use as little water as possible to hydrate the entire thing. Okay, so that feels pretty evenly moist to me. And then right before I use it and I take it out of the bucket, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take whatever amount that I'm gonna use, and then I'm gonna make sure to squeeze it so that all the excess water drips out like that, so that the moss you have is just damp and not wet. Okay, I'm gonna put this aside while we work on the wiring. Okay, so this is the wiring mesh that I use. This is the brand and the dimensions. I'll try to link it in the description box for you. So now I'm going to count. I think I usually do 11 boxes. So I'm going to count 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then just gonna do a snippity snip like that. So I'm just cutting in between, you know, the holes to get it apart. This can be a little bit sharp, so if you have gloves, you should use them. This is what the piece looks like, and then now I'm just going to kind of like roughly bend it into shape and try to align it so that it actually aligns together. I find that with mine, it usually ends up being kind of like a V shape, and then after I stuff it with the moss, I kind of reshape it again so that it fits a little bit better. Okay, so now we have our tube. I'm just going to now fill this with moss. Okay, so now I'm going to get some of my garden twist ties and we are going to use this to basically like suture up the tube. So let me just start it and then I'll show you more close up. Okay, so I hope you can see. So basically the hardest part is to try to line up the squares, and I should do the best I can. If it's not perfect, it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm just going in between two squares to make sure it goes through both edges, and then just pull. So basically creating like a seam. I think this is called a blanket stitch. And then the edges on here are still really sharp, so just be careful with that. I usually deal with these sharp edges at the end. But yeah, as you can see, like as I'm like tying this up, it's kind of creating a teardrop shape. So we're gonna just reshape it later. And I feel like most of the time my squares aren't perfectly lined up, but it's fine. Okay, now that I finished seaming up this side, as you can see, it's more like a teardrop shape than a round pole. So you can either flatten it and make a moss panel, or I just put the seam side down and kind of start rolling it, and then it kind of makes it more spherical, and it also helps get all of the sharp edges to lay down flat. Okay, so that's definitely a better shape now, and more spherical. And then I just leave the seam towards the back, and when I attach my plants, I make sure to attach them to the front. Okay, I'm going to try to clean up this moss on my counter first, and then I'll come back and we will repot the plant. Okay, so the plant I'm going to repot today is this Syngonium Albo. See, it's like flopping everywhere. It needs a moss pole. I'm also going to pot up this cutting that I took from this plant together into the pot as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the bamboo and the stake. I'm going to try to save all these little twisty tut bits so that I can just reuse it when I attach the plant to the moss pole. You might have seen me transfer this plant from soil to LECA a while back. It's honestly been so happy since I transferred it. So if you saw that video, and you were wondering if you should also transfer your Syngonium, I would highly recommend it. So I'm just going to slide these out. Do you see how like this bamboo is now like kind of just gross?
We fell in love in the winter.
Now,
but I miss you most in the fall.
we unpot.
3 years, 11 months together after one night in Montreal. Red leaves are in the breeze.
Okay, so let's say this is the end of the pole, right? So the end of the pole is going to butt up with the end of the pot like this. So we want our root system to start about halfway up. So I'm going to put the butt of the stem 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 or 6 squares up.
Or the rate that the planets change position. Or maybe everything just has a time. just like juniper in summer. Oh, we were never meant to last. Easy on the ice, but no way that we'd survive. We were wilted, we were weathered, couldn't make it to September. Maybe it's the long nights and the short cold days, or the rate that the planets change position. Maybe everything just has a time and place, and that's why you and I are out of season. The short cold days, or the rate that the planets change position. Or maybe everything just has a time and place, 'cause I know that this ended for a reason, and that's why you and I are out of season.
Okay, so this is what this plant looks like now. I'm likely going to just take a propagation off of this top section that already outgrew the pole, and then I probably will make an extension for this moss pole pretty soon as well. Alright, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, please make sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!